Who's the saint and who's the sinner? It isn't always easy to tell. The prettiest faces can hide the ugliest facets of humanity. Although this couple looks like Ken and Barbie, they're ready to sell their souls to the devil.
Once upon a time, in a small town in the outskirts of Toronto, there was a pretty little girl named Karla Homolka.
She was a real girl's girl. She liked to wear frilly dresses. She liked to play Barbie. She had to be in charge when she was playing Barbie. And some of her friends have written that they grew very tired of it.
Even into her early teen years, Karla can't let go of her love of fantasy.
She lived in something of a dream world. She loved Disney characters, and she loved princesses.
Karla is smart, popular, and lots of fun to be around. She's an attentive student, but career-minded she's not. Her main goal after graduation is landing an engagement ring.
In high school, she was the leader of a small group of women called the Diamond Club. She was smart. She could have gone to university, but she wanted the diamond and she wanted the man who went with it. She wanted to get married and make a home of her own.
Meanwhile, less than 50 miles away, a boy named Paul Bernardo is growing up in the charming Toronto suburb of Scarborough.
Paul Bernardo was apparently a very well-adjusted, or appeared to be a very well-adjusted boy. He was a polite, cute, gregarious kid.
The perfect little angel, but for the fact that he's a peeping Tom.
He started in his own neighborhood. He would hide behind the bushes. He would watch some of the young girls get undressed. He was caught a couple of times. A cop came and said, "Look, cut it out." They put it down to prankish, teenage, emerging sexuality, I guess. And so there, Paul got away with it.
Life carries on for the cocky youngster, much as it had before. And by the time he gets to college, he's a popular and charming ladies' man.
For all intents and purposes, was much like any other young fellow from the Scarborough area.
Except for the fact that Paul is hiding some disturbing sexual kinks.
He just wasn't satisfied with normal intercourse. He needed that abusive, rough, choking to really get him excited, and we didn't realize what he was doing. Maybe this is painful to them, maybe they don't like it.
Most of Paul's dates don't come around for a repeat performance, but he's about to meet his match. Little Karla Homolka is all grown up now, but this Barbie is still searching for her Ken doll. When Karla's 17, the vet clinic she works at after school sends her to a pet convention in Scarborough.
What Karla Homolka said she really wanted to do was to go to Toronto to meet guys.
And sure enough, over dinner, a young man walks in and catches her eye. He introduces himself as Paul Bernardo, now a 23-year-old accountant with a prestigious international firm.
He's a handsome-looking guy, blonde hair, outgoing, seemingly very self-confident, and I think in her mind she's looking down the road thinking, here's my Ken and here's the perfect situation.
When she met Paul Bernardo, he checked every box. He was tall, he was blonde, he was blue-eyed, he was educated, he had a university degree, he had a good job, he was well-paid, and most importantly, he was ambitious. He was ambitious for wealth and for status, two of the things that Karla Homolka desperately wanted. So she fell crazy, madly, hypnotically in love.
And within hours, she's in bed with him. Having photographs taken. I'm going like, okay, that's pretty quick. And I think from that moment on, the two of them found whatever they were looking for in the other, and regrettably, it had this absolutely fantastically bizarre, nasty, and violent streak to it.
The first time Karla Homolka and Paul Bernardo had sex, it was reportedly animalistic. They were at each other, it was constant, it was loud, and apparently they had sex all night.
What happens in that hotel room is one hell of an unholy hookup. A hot, sticky mess of lust and gluttony that'll soon take on a life of its own. And if Karla thinks she's found a Prince Charming, she needs to have her vision checked.
Karla is drawn to Paul's domineering ways. And now that she's found her devilish Ken doll, she will do anything to keep him.
Despite the hearts and flowers, Paul let Karla know that he was very disappointed with her. She hadn't safeguarded her virginity. She had already had her first sexual experience with a high school boyfriend, and Paul never let her forget it. And he demeaned her. She wanted to regain that position of power in Paul's eyes, so she began to do things to make Paul realize she would go further than any virgin ever would.
But Karla alone isn't enough to satisfy Paul's violent lust. Little does she know he has an even darker side. In his spare time, Paul begins to rape young teenagers in his Scarborough neighborhood, often stalking his victims as they walk home from the bus stop.
He often spent time trailing a woman that he found attractive or looked appropriate as his victim. He would learn her routine, and he would pounce. Sometimes he was so bold that he jumped women as they were putting the key into the door of their home.
He would drag them into a secluded area and he would rape them.
Sodomy is his preferred MO, with constant verbal humiliation.
Throughout all of this torture, he would have them call themselves names, demean themselves. I deserve this. And he liked to finish by sticking things into their orifices, branches, dirt. He was a vile, vile person who wanted to harm other humans in the worst possible way.
Oh, Paul, such a sick and twisted little monster. One thing you can be sure of, the more he feeds his demons, the hungrier and more violent they'll become.
There was an escalation of violence in his rapes. He was armed with a knife. He used ligatures. He shattered the lives of his sexual assault victims forever.
The rapes carry on for over a year, more than a dozen victims. And all the while, he's still serious with Karla. She remains clueless that her beloved is forever on the prowl. But that's about to change. The person he sets his sights on now lives in the bedroom down the hall. Karla's 13-year-old sister, Tammy. More than a year after Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka met, their twisted relationship is still going strong. Though Karla is an obedient sex slave, Paul longs for something else.
Paul said to Karla, who's all big eyes, and you know, he said, well, actually, I really like your baby sister, Tammy. Imagine what that does to a woman. This is Karla Homolka, who wants everything to be perfect, at least appearance-wise. And he's saying, you know, I actually want to have sex with your little sister.
Karla, she should have just, backed right off and either called the police or told her parents. But I think she was drifting into that dream world of hers, and then she just slid over the edge with him.
If ever there was an excuse to graciously break up with your domineering boyfriend, here it is, coming at you loud and clear. But whatever shred of humanity once existed in Karla Homolka, it's now long gone. She stands by her man and consciously decides to do one of the most depraved, cruel, and self-serving things I've ever heard of. She serves up her own sister to him on a silver platter.
Carla would arrange the folding blinds to make it easier for him to like look in Tammy's bedroom when she was undressing, and Carla facilitated all this.
Meanwhile, after more than a dozen rapes in the suburb of Scarborough, police finally have a composite of the suspect.
A bank teller looked at the composite sketch and said, "That's Paul Bernardo." It was really accurate. And they brought him in.
But Paul hardly seems the criminal type.
He was a very well-educated man with a good job, you know, seemingly a good family life, a girlfriend. I mean, he didn't fit the mold of somebody who would be a psychopathic sex villain.
He was articulate, he was attractive, and he was a brilliant liar, as many psychopaths are.
He was asked to volunteer a biological sample, which he did, and the police rated him very low as a suspect.
Instead of testing his DNA right away, the sample goes to the end of the line and sits in storage indefinitely. Seems Bernardo has caught a lucky break. His sense of omnipotence swells even more when Carla reveals her Christmas present to him.
She one day said, "I know how much you love Tammy, and I've stolen drugs from the vet hospital where I work, and I'll drug my sister so that you can take her virginity."
It all starts out with a Christmas Eve dinner out of a magazine. But once Carla's parents go to bed, things go haywire.
Carla and Paul and Tammy were downstairs in the family room while Mr. and Mrs. Homolka were upstairs, and they fed Tammy drinks of alcohol laced with these crushed halcyon tablets that did render her unconscious.
Carla then places a rag soaked with the anesthetic halothane over Tammy's mouth, completely knocking her out.
Paul, you know I love you.
The two of them went to town on this poor little girl.
Bernardo demanded that they record all of the rape of Tammy Homolka. And at one point, he apparently demands that she gets down on the floor and performs oral sex on her sister, her little sister. And she doesn't.
I mean, this was a woman who was as disturbed as Paul was. And how the two of them could ever find one another in the first place is just, you know, it's one of those fates that we just don't understand.
The party ends when Tammy starts throwing up, and then she stops breathing. Instead of calling for help right away, Paul and Carla get busy covering their tracks.
They had to redress Tammy, they had to clean her up, they had to hide all of the evidence of a sexual assault before they called the emergency services.
By the time paramedics arrive, Tammy is already dead.
Police arrived and unfortunately interviewed both Homolka and Bernardo together, so one was aware what the other one was saying. And at one point, a young uniformed officer had to stop Carla from trying to launder a blanket.
The signs of foul play are everywhere, but the coroner's office never runs a drug panel or checks for signs of rape. Instead, they write off Tammy's untimely death as an accident due to alcohol consumption.
Paul was pretty ticked at Carla for not being more careful, and he blamed her for messing up what was supposed to be his pleasure.
He began now to blackmail Homolka, saying, if you tell anybody what happened, I'm going to tell them that you did it.
But Paul and Carla quickly move on and use the murder for more exaggerated sex acts.
A couple weeks after Tammy's death, she dressed in Tammy's school uniform and pretended to be Tammy and spoke to Bernardo in a way that he demanded that she assume the role of her younger sister.
The relationship has reached a new level of depravity. So what better time to start planning a dream wedding?
She wanted a huge dress. It looks like the Disney princess. She wanted to ride away from the church in a carriage with a horse. She wanted pheasant under glass, which is an extraordinarily expensive thing to serve at your wedding.
With only a few months to go until the big day, the couple rents a house together.
And he develops the fantasy to build a dungeon in his basement where he would keep abducted sex slaves and go younger and younger victims, searching for this elusive virgin victim who would satisfy his fantasy.
Now to find the perfect girl.
He was just wandering through backyards, and just by a pure chance, he sees Leslie Mahaffey.
I mean, Leslie Mahaffey was absolutely beautiful girl. I mean, from the inside out, just really upbeat, lots of fun, kind, sweet, generous, great kid.
A typical teenager, she's out past her curfew and has forgotten her house key.
So she sort of went into her backyard, and there's Bernardo. And he offers her a cigarette, and then he abducts her at knife point.
Bernardo gets his camera and goes crazy on Leslie, torturing her and raping her repeatedly. In between his sessions, he offers her some wine. Carla flips out. Paul is using the good crystal.
The bride-to-be knows her fiancé's kidnapped a young girl so that they can bind, torture, and rape her together. And she's mad because the victim's lips touched her crystal wine glasses. She's one demonic piece of work, and she's about to take that bizarre fury out on her victim.
Carla loses it, unleashing on the captive, assaulting and torturing her while Paul films and directs. More than 24 hours after Leslie was abducted, they've had their fill. But their plan changes when the blindfold slips and she sees their faces.
So with drugs left over from Tammy's death, they drugged Leslie Mahaffey, and when she was under the effects of the sedative, Bernardo strangled her.
After cleaning the crime scene, they stash the body in the basement. After all, Carla's parents are coming over for dinner, and they can't have a dead girl just lying around. Once the coast is clear, they orchestrate a gruesome plan for disposing of the teenager's body.
They cut Leslie up into pieces and decapitated her. And Bernardo mixed cement, and he immersed Leslie's limbs into blocks. His plan was to dump them in a nearby lake.
Carla helped him carry some of the concrete slabs to the nearby lake, and one of them was so heavy they couldn't get it in the water.
2 weeks later, it's their wedding day.
A very elaborate wedding. They had a horse and buggy. You look back on it now, it's almost incomprehensible. 2 weeks after you murder and dismember somebody, then you get married.
The day they were getting married in all that glamour, first some fishermen and then ultimately the police saw some of the cement-encased limbs bobbing to the surface.
Dental records identify the body as Leslie Mahaffey. But there isn't a shred of evidence to tie the crime to the newlyweds, who are off on their honeymoon in Hawaii. Carla makes use of the video camera again, this time to profess her undying love to her new husband.
It was Carla talking about how she is just so happy and delighted that the marriage went off without a hitch, and she's going to have the chance to spend the rest of her life with Paul. Well, I mean, they've just killed somebody. Chopped the woman up and put her in cement. And, oh, well, let's go to Hawaii and have a honeymoon. Still haunts me.
Now, freshly returned home from Hawaii, the happy newlyweds are looking for a wedding gift for themselves. Another victim. But it won't be long before wrath causes these living dolls to turn on one another. Newlyweds Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka are back from their honeymoon. With a renewed lust for blood and sex, they set their sights on 15-year-old Kristen French.
A remarkable, beautiful girl, very athletic, just sweet, sweet, sweet. You know, it would never hurt anybody.
She was walking home and she was passing by a church, and there's the car, and there's Karla, and she's got this map out, and she's trying to fold it open, and she's asking for help.
And then that's when Paul Bernardo came out of the car and shoved her in back.
It was Karla who kept the pressure on Kristen French's head, pulled her hair to make sure that she couldn't alert anybody that she was being kidnapped.
They take the girl home, roll video, and with all of Toronto searching for Kristen, brutally rape and torture her over the course of 3 days.
Obviously, she saw Karla, because Karla, waved her over to help her with the map directions. They had no choice. I mean, they had to kill her.
After choking the life out of her, they strip her naked and leave her in a dump in the woods.
Somebody was going through the trash to see if there's anything of value and came across the body and determined it was Kristen.
A young woman abducted, assaulted, and thrown away like trash. The public is panicked.
At least in my lifetime, nobody could recall something like this happening. Many of us just shut down. Many women I knew just stopped going anywhere.
But even the worst darkness comes to an end eventually. Soon, the two monsters are buckling under the pressure of what they've done. They turn on each other, with Karla getting the worst of it.
He was ultra paranoid he was going to get caught, and he just wasn't happy. And he started just getting more violent with her and blaming her for this, so he beat her violently. She had, like, raccoon eyes.
I suppose that was just the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back.
Karla moves out. Then, in January 1993, more than 2 years after his DNA sample is submitted for testing, Paul Bernardo is finally identified as the Scarborough rapist. Investigators put him under surveillance while they build their case. The first person they need to question is his estranged wife, Karla.
They interviewed her in relation to the Scarborough rape investigation. Certain questions that were posed to her caused her to believe that the net was closing in on the both of them.
Playing the role of the abused wife, Karla hires an attorney and makes a deal. She'll give them all the evidence they need to arrest Bernardo for the murders in exchange for leniency.
She said there were tapes, but she said she didn't know where they were. The government and the police moved forward thinking their only hope was to give her a deal so Bernardo would go away.
On February 17, 1993, investigators arrive at the couple's home with a search warrant. What they desperately want to find are those videotapes. Paul had hidden them in the ceiling, and while an investigator searches the exact hiding place, he doesn't reach quite far enough.
How could they miss it? There was just a lot of head shaking. They were very hardworking, diligent. They just missed it. The long arm of the law. We called it the short arm of the law case.
Without that videotaped evidence, investigators don't realize the extent of Karla's involvement. So her attorney is able to negotiate a lenient 12-year sentence. Shortly after Karla finalizes her deal, Paul Bernardo's attorney finds the tapes and turns them over to authorities. They become the key evidence in the prosecution's case.
During the trial, while the videotapes were played to the jury, the TV monitors were turned away from the public so nobody saw them. But they could hear what was on the soundtrack.
It was very painful. I don't think any of us really wanted to be there at some point. A lot of the reporters were just, they were sick.
So much for Carla portraying herself as the abused wife.
When the public learned that Homolka had been so actively involved, not just in kidnapping and holding hostage these girls, but actually had sex with them and brutalized them and had two opportunities at minimum to let Kristen French go, the outrage has never ended in this country.
Seems the wife is as much of a predator as her husband.
You're looking into the whites of her eyes, and you saw the personification of evil. And they were kind of empty at the same time. That's exactly the look you see in her eyes in the videotapes.
It's that same demonic look that reporter Paula Todd sees when she tracks down Carla 12 years later after serving her prison sentence. She's now living in the Caribbean and is remarried with 3 children, free to live out her life in an island paradise.
How painfully ironic that the woman responsible for the death of her baby sister and 2 other children is now raising a trio of her own. She can tell herself she was a victim, spend the rest of her life playing tropical Barbie, but everyone knows she's a cold-blooded monster.
She's killed, she's raped, and she has eluded psychiatric diagnosis. I looked back at her and I thought, I know who you are. No matter what you try to do, I know who you are.
So now, Paul Bernardo is serving the life sentence for both of them.
If Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French could say something now to Paul Bernardo, I believe it would be rot in hell.
When we come back, everyone knows the big man around town, and God help you if you ever tell him no. The little town of Nixa, just outside Springfield, Missouri, is the kind of place where everyone knows each other. And one prominent family always has people talking. The Carnahans.
Garnett Carnahan was a self-made man, rumored to be the richest man in Nixa.
He owns an aluminum foundry, one of the biggest businesses in the region, and he's got a big family to go with it.
They lived at the Carnahan compound, and yes, they did have foster children who were adopted. There was a communal living arrangement.
One Carnahan stands out, Garnett's pride and joy, his son Gerald.
Garnett brought Gerald in to learn a lot more of the business, the sales part of it, research and development. I think that he was grooming him to take over the business at some point.
But all work and no play makes Jerry a dull boy.
He had, I think, even by his own admission, run on a pretty fast track in southwest Missouri. He was a good-looking, obviously well-financed young man, and I think he had a clear reputation as being a partier.
By the time he hits his mid-20s, Jerry is poised to inherit his father's aluminum empire. But a good citizen, he isn't.
All he cared about was himself. That was pretty obvious. So, spoiled rich boy. He was not a warm person at all. He just had the coldest eyes. He thought he was better than everybody else there.
We all know the type. The overprivileged, self-inflated creep missing a human heart. By the time he's a young man, the dark side is calling to Jerry, and soon he'll be swimming in its worst excesses. Pride gone wrong, wrath for no reason, and an insatiable lust.
Gerald went to the mobile home of a former girlfriend, had a new boyfriend. Just walks into the bedroom, and sexually assaulted her right while the boyfriend watched.
Given Jerry's prominent connections, the couple feels powerless to press charges against him.
Jerry was untouchable. He had the protection of his father, who, like any father, would protect his son, but Gerald was his favorite, so Gerald could do no wrong.
Jerry eventually settles down with a sophisticated businesswoman named Pat, almost a decade his elder.
She had waited a long time to get married. She was a beautiful and accomplished person. So when she finally did marry him, I think everybody thought that it would work.
At that time, it just looked like Gerald and his wife were just very happy.
But Jerry has a wandering eye. Almost every day, he leaves his office and heads to a little diner by the town's cattle auction. What he's hungriest for isn't on the menu. He's developed a yen for a 20-year-old waitress named Jackie Johns.
Oh, she was the it girl. She's kind of like the heroine of the town. She was pretty and had her whole future in front of her, and people were really proud of her.
She was very popular in high school, very outgoing. She was prom queen. She loved attention from boys.
Of course, Jerry thinks he deserves Jackie's special attention.
When he would come into the cafe, he would always want to sit in her section.
He wore expensive cowboy boots. He would tilt back in his chair and kind of watch her and just make her uncomfortable.
She didn't like it, and she'd say, "Will you wait on him today?" And I'd be like, "I don't like him. I don't want to wait on him either."
So obsessed is Jerry Carnahan. He offers the young waitress a job at his aluminum plant. Strapped for cash, she accepts.
He had told her that it was going to be a secretarial position, which probably didn't sound too bad to somebody who's working as a waitress, but she ended up working out in the factory, which didn't really fit her personality, so she didn't stay there long.
It's becoming very clear that Jackie has zero interest in Jerry, even if he is a big man around town. Besides, she's got a new boyfriend named Cody.
Cody was a nice guy. He was quiet. Jackie was the rowdy one. He was the quiet one, sort of like opposites attract.
That's when the phone calls start, with Jackie's best friend Dana often answering them.
I was staying the night at her house, and the phone rang, and I answered. He asked for Jackie, and I asked her who it was, and she told me it was Jerry Carnahan.
She could almost look out her bedroom window and see the tops of the houses where the Carnahan family lived, and she didn't want to talk to him. She never really explained why, but she was adamant, and she handed the phone to Dana, and Dana got rid of him.
Everywhere she goes around town, whether she's with company or alone, Jackie feels like she's being followed and watched.
She would make me go into her house and check to make sure no one was there before I left. Go in with her and make sure no one was there.
Jackie is on edge, scared that she may be in danger. And across town, even Jerry's wife, Pat, is growing fearful of his disturbing ways.
I think the marriage was just falling apart, and all the stress of him not being able to control it. I think the writing was on the wall about the marriage at that point.
People around town know Jerry Carnahan as a bully, a narcissist, an arrogant ass. He's a creepy stalker and a walking time bomb. And now, his threatening and scary behavior is coming home to roost. This guy has spent his life breaking the rules and getting away with it. Soon, he'll take his depravity to a whole new level.
Gerald Carnahan is used to getting exactly what he wants. And for at least one woman in his life, a normal summer night in Nixa, Missouri, is about to turn very violent. "28-year-old Jerry Carnahan is prowling the streets of his hometown, Nixa, Missouri. He's rich, he's bored, and he's dangerous."
He had parked his truck alongside the 7-Eleven, facing the front, so that he could see anyone who went in that store, including Jackie Johns, who did.
He was there basically conducting surveillance. watching to see who was coming and going from that convenience store.
His whole depraved life, Jerry's had people say yes to his every whim. But with Jackie, it's always no, and he's furious. Now his lust is infused with anger, and he doesn't just long for her body anymore. Now he longs to punish her for rejecting him.
We believe that he left after he saw her there, realizing she was probably going to be going home. And that convenience store is located about a mile from where she resided with her parents. And we suspect that what happened was that he feigned a vehicle breakdown.
The thought is that Jackie drove by, and just because she's the kind-hearted sweetheart of the town, gave him a ride.
At the point where she let him into the car was where things took a very sinister turn.
Jerry pounces and attacks Jackie. Then he rapes her and beats her to death.
I just think that those were impulses that perhaps he did not have and does not have total control over.
The next morning, a delivery driver comes upon an ominous scene.
The door was open, the light was on, the purse was in the passenger seat, but there's blood in the back seat, and there's blood smeared on the window, and they knew then that something was horribly wrong.
When police arrive, they open the trunk. There's no body, but they find the bloody murder weapon.
Well, I knew right away that this was certainly a very serious situation, that clearly if she were alive, that she was probably very seriously injured.
But there's no happy ending in Nixa. 4 days later, some fishermen on Lake Springfield find Jackie's nude body floating in the reeds.
They performed an autopsy and documented all of her injuries, and as a matter of course, they did do a rape kit.
At that time, in 1985, we didn't know what DNA was, but the semen samples and the fluid samples that were taken were to basically help us with elimination of blood typing in the event suspects were developed.
Investigators are long on suspicion, but painfully short on hard evidence. But that doesn't stop the people of small-town Nixa from whispering about who the prime suspect is. Calls pour into police. Several witnesses say they saw Jerry Carnahan's truck at the 7-Eleven. Another witness reports seeing Jerry's truck near the crime scene. Police bring him in for questioning and can't help but notice he's covered in scratches.
He told us a story that he had been involved in a very physical volleyball game the weekend before, and that was where those injuries had occurred. Claimed that at the time, other witnesses were placing his truck there at the 7-Eleven. He was in fact at home with his stepdaughter.
He felt he could get away with anything, that there would always be a family there to bail him out, that there would always be a family there to hire the best lawyers to protect him.
But the cocky rich kid loses his cool when officers carry out a warrant to collect pubic hair.
He literally went into a fetal position and began sobbing. It didn't last long. After they had collected the samples and he had rearranged his clothing, he went back to being the arrogant, somewhat swaggering Gerald Carnahan.
Still, none of the physical evidence conclusively links him to the crime. The charges against Carnahan are dismissed.
That was extremely frustrating, sickening.
But there's no escaping the evil that dwells within him. And over the years, it only grows more vile. He's drinking heavily, using a cocktail of prescription painkillers, and his wrath comes out in disturbing ways.
You know, he shot into the floor with a pistol. He threatened that he would kill his wife. He did hit her with a TV remote.
When police arrive on scene, he hurls a styrofoam cup of urine at them.
He would do bizarre things, but he got out. I mean, he wasn't in jail more than a night off of that incident before he was free again.
With his life spinning out of control, Jerry gets the urge to go on the prowl again. At 2 a.m. on a cold March night, he spots a pretty 18-year-old.
Next thing she knows, he's got her, and she begins to fight.
I think he is fearless about getting caught. That's just brazen.
Unlike Jackie Johns, this girl is lucky. She breaks free and runs to a nearby store. And before Jerry pulls away, a witness gets his license plate number. This time, the charges stick. And Carnahan is sent to prison for 2 years. But he still can't be charged in Jackie's murder.
We all knew in our heart that sooner or later that case was going to be solved, that it would be solved the next time there was a murder, and sooner or later people who are engaged in that kind of activity ultimately make a mistake and get caught.
But 20 years later, it's science that catches up to the arrogant rich kid. Nixa's most notorious cold case is reopened. A DNA test of the rape kit in Jackie's case shows that the likelihood of the semen belonging to anyone other than Gerald Carnahan is 1 in 6 quadrillion.
It's my understanding from the officers who effected the arrest that he cried, physically sobbed, and was extremely upset.
A jury convicts Carnahan of first-degree murder. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison.
I get emotional just thinking about it. It's just it's such a relief, you know? And I think that at that point you realize how much you'd actually carried all those years.
Everyone in Nixa is breathing a whole lot easier with Jerry Carnahan put where he belongs. Finally, the rich guy who thought he could get away with anything, and nearly did, gets his comeuppance.
Jackie's mother died shortly after her murder, and everyone in her family's convinced that she basically mourned herself to death. So it was bittersweet from the standpoint that Jackie's mother had not lived to see the ultimate resolution of that case.
Science got him in the end. Justice was served.
What comes around goes around, and it may take years. Eventually, all your sins will come back to you.
That's what happens when sins turn deadly.